Hey everybody, I'm Reese, and this is Reese Rides. And in this video, I'm going to give you a full review of the Rekluse Radius CX auto clutch, combined with the aux brake left-hand rear brake. So stick around. So just to give you some background, about 12 years ago, I had a YZ450 motocross bike, and that particular model happened to be a 4-speed. So I put a Rekluse on it at that time, and so I have a little bit of experience with a Rekluse. That was my only experience of Rekluse prior to this Rekluse in this bike. And what I realized in that combination was that, for one thing, it was a 4-speed, so the gear ratios were a little bit weird, and it would cause some weird sporadic freewheeling of the clutch because you couldn't carry a gear all the way down. And this was an older model of the Rekluse clutch that had ball bearings instead of the wedge system that they do now. So in that system, I had some issues where I would be going down a hill and I would probably be in first, but first gear was so tall because it was a 4-speed that the clutch would just freewheel, and it would really catch me off guard, and I would end up in some bad situations and locking up the front brake, and it wasn't a good experience. So I kind of strayed away from that. So having had that background of the clutch freewheeling kind of unexpectedly and not having good brake control, just in general, I don't have good brake control, I decided that I would pair up the Rekluse clutch with a left-hand rear brake. And so just right out of the gate, I just decided I'm going to do both of those at the same time. If I'm going to do the Rekluse, I'm going to do the left-hand rear brake. So I did. And I'll tell you all the things that I like about it. So one of the main things is that it's just more fun. It makes this bike more fun to ride. So this is a 450, so it's kind of big and powerful for the technical enduro type riding that I'm doing, and this Rekluse really tames it down. It really just makes it more fun for me to ride because I don't have to worry about grabbing the clutch, and when I come into a turn a little bit hot, because I do on a big bike like this, and if I stomp that rear brake and lock up that rear tire, I don't have to worry about it stalling. And so it's just a lot more fun to ride when you don't have to think about all those things with this bike. So then another thing is that I stand a lot more. Because I don't have good brake control, I especially don't have good brake control when I'm standing up. So when I'm standing up, it's really hard for me to have the weight where I want it on the bike and still be able to hit that rear brake if I want to, and not, predominantly rely on my front brake. So I stand a lot more now, which helps me to improve my balance. And so I've done a lot more like full lock turns through the trees and stuff like that because I can stand and I don't have to worry too much about clutching and hitting the rear brake. I can keep both my feet planted on the pegs and keep my weight even and move it the way that I want to without having to worry about moving my foot forward to hit that rear brake. I can just hit the left-hand rear brake and then just throttle on. I don't have to worry about clutching either. So that makes it really nice, and I've definitely learned some balancing skills with that. So another thing is that when you take off, because it does all of the slipping of the clutch for you, it does it almost perfectly every time. I mean, you have to gauge your throttle, your acceleration. You have to keep that in mind because that is how you're slipping the clutch. So with that, you can control the amount of slip that you're getting and the amount of jerk that you get off idle and just from a stop. So that makes it kind of nice, just taking off from a stop a little bit smoother. And so kind of piggybacking on that, you can run a gear high, so you can take off in second gear. I used to take off in second gear in this bike anyway because it has the wider ratio transmission, and first gear was like a tractor. So I could take off in second gear anyway, but now I can take off in second gear on a hill and it'll just do all the clutching for me. Now I'm sure that gets the clutch hot, but it works really well. But then I can run a gear high on the trails. So usually in my videos, I'm usually running third gear through the kind of more flowy trails, and you can hear that I'm like really in the low revs, and even the clutch kind of freewheels occasionally because I'm in the low revs, but it keeps it keeps it smooth. You know, running in third gear, it keeps it smooth. When I power on, it slips the clutch for me, so it's just a nice, smooth flow. So that makes it really nice. And so another kind of nice thing, and this is more nice for those like tight switchbacks where, you know, you might be stuck behind somebody, or maybe even you're trying to conserve fuel. So you can just coast. And so the way you do that is you would just, without the throttle on, you know, while you're idling, or you know, if you're moving, you just grab that clutch, let the idles come down, and once the idles are down, the auto clutch kicks in, let the clutch out, and you're coasting. So you can coast as long as you want, and then you just blip the throttle again to get the clutch to engage and have power back to the rear wheel. So that's kind of a nice feature. And so the last thing that I'm going to talk about is compression braking, which I'm going to revisit in the things that I didn't like. So in the compression braking, I had actually contacted Rekluse because this is my big concern, was losing my compression braking. That's one of the huge things about riding a four-stroke that I come to rely on. I don't know, I'm not going to say that I really like it, but I've gotten used to it and I rely on it now, and I find that it works with my riding style. So I was really concerned about losing any compression braking. And when I contacted one of the guys down at Rekluse and expressed that concern, they assured me that you're going to maintain most of your compression braking so long as you're not, like, you know, in fourth gear going down the hill going 5 miles per hour. And they were right. You do maintain most of your compression braking. So that was nice. But I will say that the gearing on this bike, and just in the transmission, and the gear change that I have done just to the drive, have improved that ability to maintain your compression braking. You do still lose a little bit of compression braking, and we'll talk about that later, but you maintain most of it, you know, when you're going down hills and stuff. But I do have to attribute most of that to the gearing here. So you won't be able to run it all the way down the way that I had in the past into the revs and still maintain that compression braking. So you'll have to watch out for that. And so now we'll move into some of the things that I don't like so much about the clutch, or I find a little bit weird about it. And so one of the first things is not so much that I don't like about it, but for new riders, this is going to be more important. You won't learn clutch control if you put one of these clutches in there. So take that how you want. That could be a neutral. So an actual dislike that I have is you'll get occasional disengagement of the clutch. Sometimes, you know, when you're speeding down a hill, like a rocky hill generally, and you're going down this hill, and there will be periodic rises. So maybe there will be these weather vanes or water runoffs to get the water off the trail if you're going down one of those types of trails. But anyway, you catch air off of one of those, and if you happen to hit a stationary rock or something that stops that rear tire from rotating just as you're coming off the ground, while you're in the air, the clutch will disengage. And so by the time you land, you'll be freewheeling. And so that can sometimes catch you off guard. And so that's why I really like having that left-hand rear brake and just covering that most of the time. So again, we'll come back to the compression braking. You do lose a little bit of compression braking. You're gonna lose a little bit on the low end. And if your bike is geared toward the high end, so if your first gear isn't like a tractor, like mine happens to be, you're gonna lose some compression braking if you're down in the revs and you're trying to do some tight technical stuff. So you're gonna be freewheeling a lot more. So the gearing helps. I've kind of said this to myself out loud, is on the downhills, I have to run a gear low to make sure that I have the revs a little bit higher, to make sure that I'm getting that compression braking that I want. On the uphills, I usually run a gear high because it'll do the clutching for me and it'll keep the wheel spin down. But on the downhills, I usually run a gear low to make sure that I keep that compression braking, unless you want to cover that left-hand rear brake and just rely on your brakes to slow you down. So that's one thing. So then another thing is kind of stemming off of the clutch control is the double blip technique to get over like a log or a rock or something like that. I am out of the practice of using my clutch now, and because I don't really have a great sense so much of where the clutch will engage or won't engage, because I have to control all of that by how much throttle I give and how fast I'm going. it's difficult to do the double blip technique. So usually what you would do is you would have that clutch kind of slipping or even all the way in, and you would be giving it gas, and you would blip essentially by letting the clutch out in blips to get you like that front wheel lofted over, and then that extra power to get you over the object. So it's a little more difficult. You have to control that entirely by twisting your wrist over here. So that makes it a little bit more difficult to do that. It's still doable, but it's more difficult to do that. So the last thing that I'm going to talk about that's a little bit weird is there's some inertia to the clutch engagement and disengagement. So I mentioned a little bit ago that when you're going down a hill and if the clutch freewheels, you can just blip the throttle to get it to come back and engage again, so that you're still connected to that rear wheel and you still have drive and compression braking. So there's another aspect to that where it requires some finesse. So I've noticed that coming down hills, if I'm kind of on the cusp of freewheeling versus staying connected, freewheel versus engagement of the clutch, if I give it a little blip, it's very quick to then engage and then disengage again. So it disengages kind of quickly. So it has a bit of inertia to the grabbiness. So in other words, if you're running in high RPMs and you just let the RPMs come all the way down, that clutch will stay engaged for quite a ways down into the revs. As opposed to if you were already in the low revs and you just blipped it a little bit just to bring the revs up, it'll engage quickly and then disengage quickly, even though you may have gotten the revs up to, say, the middle of where you were when you were bringing it all the way down from high to low. Even if you blipped it to the middle, it still seems like it disengages quicker. So it does seem to like to just run all the way down under its own slipping, I guess you could say. So that's just kind of a weird one just to get used to. All in all, I would say that the Rekluse clutch does a great job of making this bike suitable for enduro and hard technical riding, especially when paired with this left-hand rear brake. And I don't regret in the slightest doing those both at the same time. I think the lesson that I learned initially when I put the Rekluse in an older 450 that I had was invaluable. I need this left-hand rear brake because I don't have good foot brake skills, and honestly I think it allows me to be a better, more balanced rider by using this left-hand brake, because I'm able to keep my weight where I want it without having to worry about foot controls while I'm managing my balance and other things. So that is my review of the Rekluse Radius CX clutch and the aux brake left-hand rear brake. Again, I think those are a great combination, and on 4-stroke, I would not do them separately. So if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you on the next one.